So the overall focus for this evening is health and well-being in communities. And actually, I want to begin with a story, if that's all right. It's a true story and is directly linked to the climate crisis that we face, and also to human well-being and resilience in the face of climate disaster. So I'm going to take you to New Year's Eve on 2019. My husband and I were watching Jules Holland on the telly, which is what we want to do on New Year's Eve. That will probably only be familiar to those from the UK, but it's a music show that kind of brings in the new year. And we had a phone call, and it was a phone call from dear friends from Australia. We thought they were phoning to wish us a happy new year. Christina and James are environmentalists and long-time climate activists, as I'm sure many of you are on this call, this event tonight. Christina was actually responsible for protecting the biodiversity of Australian plants and ecodiversity, and James was responsible for ensuring the ecosystems in the shipping lanes into Australia. So there were, big, really, it was their life was environmentalism and action. In fact, we first met them when we were living and working in Samoa, because James worked for the South Pacific Regional Environment Programme. They'd both taken semi-retirement to follow their dream of building a beautiful eco-friendly home in 90 acres of Australian bushland. It's called Scrubby Creek. It was absolutely their dream place. It was beautiful, it's diverse. In fact, even in the creek running through their land, James had worked very hard to introduce an endangered species it was a fish called the mountain galactica. I'd never heard of it, but it was just absolutely their life. And they kind of went there in a way they were hoping to kind of build a little space for themselves that was absolutely eco-friendly, biodiverse, walking lightly on the earth. And they wanted to kind of say, the climate crisis is out there. This is our bit. We're going to live on this bit. So now back to that telephone call. They simply said, we've only a minute to speak as our battery's running out, and we're asking you to pray for us. We're in a field with our neighbours, and all around us are bushfires. We don't know if we'll be rescued or if we'll survive, and we don't know if our property or land will survive either. And then they said, sorry, we have to go. Please pray for us. And the phone went dead. They did survive. In fact, they survived for 3 days in a field surrounded by raging fires. They lost their home, their 90 acres, and everything in it was burnt to a cinder. The fires were followed by 3 devastating floods that washed tons of mud onto their parched, now treeless land. I want to just pause for a moment and really think about the impact of something like that on your health and well-being. The months after the floods and the fire were, for Christina said, were really hell. Their physical lives had been threatened and causing real post-traumatic stress. It's a real existential crisis when you're facing 70-foot walls of flames and you have a little piece of land there and you don't know what's going to happen. Their land was gone, and their dreams had quite literally gone up in smoke. So what happens next? They took stock and decided that they would actually remain on that piece of land in a tent, and they would slowly rebuild, restock, restore, and replenish the earth. And in doing so, they believed and had hope that this would somehow rebuild and restore them. So actually this morning I was thinking about the talk this evening, and I phoned them, as you can do now, just, pick up the phone and there you are, you're in Australia in Scrubby Creek on their bushland with Christina and James. So I spoke to them this morning about what sort of mental or spiritual strategies they use to find the strength to do this, and they said that one critical thing for them was the belief that to walk away and not restore their small part of the earth would have been an act of cowardice. They felt that the animals, the plants, and the ecosystem in that 90 acres needed their help, and that by working together with nature, they could begin to make a difference and heal themselves and heal the land. Actually, they sounded happy. They had connected with local people who had a similar vision. So a community, if you like. They had purpose, and that they had grown in their awareness that they had been burying their head in the sand before, and that they are absolutely in this together as a human species. There's nowhere actually to run to. We can only survive mentally, physically, and spiritually by collaborating across the whole globe, while at the same time taking care of the very earth beneath our feet, right where we stand, right where we live, right with our local communities, just taking care of our local environment. So Christina this morning sent me a link to something that she found really helpful, which was called, it was a link to the resilience. Oh, sorry, I've just been told my battery's running out. So let me plug in my computer. Otherwise, I'm going to disappear off your screen. So, right, we're plugged in. As I know, all of you are very plugged in people. So Christina sent me a link to something called the Resilience Whisperer. I think that's a fantastic name. What a great name that is, the Resilience Whisperer. His name is Dennis Hoiberg, whose key message is that hope is the secret ingredient of resilience. And I'm sure Adelaide and others who've experienced Indigenous communities and what they're facing in the global south will know that there is absolutely no resilience without hope. And Dennis says that hope stands for healthy habits, optimistic thinking, planning, and enacting. And Christina and James actually embody all those aspects of hope. So now fast forward from 2019 to 2020, we were heading over to visit Christina and James in their new situation, their burnt out one. When the pandemic hit, and Nick and I became stranded in New Zealand for 8 weeks, unable to visit them, unable to go back to Samoa, which was our dream, to go back and visit the communities that we'd lived with. And with time in our hands to really think both about the pandemic and the climate crisis. Two things I believe are intimately related. So in returning to the UK and to Scotland, in my post as Director of Interfaith Scotland, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that we must take climate action situated right where we are and within our own circle of influence. So I thought, well, I'm not a farmer, I'm not really even, I'm definitely 100% not a climate expert in the way that the lovely presenters earlier on were. So I had to think, well, what is my circle of influence? What can I do that, and I thought, well, I have the faith communities are the bread and butter of interfaith dialogue, and there's so much that we can do. So we inaugurated a year of climate action, and what a year it has been. Faith communities and local interfaith groups right across Scotland have focused the lens of their interfaith activities on raising awareness of the climate crisis, of alerting people to what governments were committing to in Paris in 2015, and they have been preparing for and pooling all their resources in a real multi-faith way in preparation for COP26, which is coming to Scotland and to Glasgow. What incredible opportunities. It has been a joy and a privilege to work with the communities in so many diverse ways. I know we haven't got an awful lot of time, and you really want to get onto the questions. So rather than go through and just list after list of the things that we're doing, suffice to say that we've had events galore, discussions galore, conversations galore, and I'll put in a link to our Interfaith Scotland website into the climate section, so you can just look that up and see for yourselves what we're doing. But just to mention a few, we've had the Climate Crisis Beyond series. Our annual interfaith lecture is the climate crisis a human rights issue, with Budi from Kenya and Budi from Indonesia and Ben from Kenya as our keynote speakers. Scottish Interfaith Week is Together for the Planet, and it's happening at exactly the same time as COP. We're having a huge prayer and meditation vigil in George Square, where in a very multi-faith way that we're all praying together for the negotiators in the COP summit. We have a Talanoa dialogue with the International Liaison Committee to the UNFCCC, and the faith leaders of Scotland have come together over quite a number of months actually in the build up to this, and they have written what's now called the Glasgow Multi-Faith Declaration for COP. Dorothea, have I time to share it, or would you prefer I just put a link into that Glasgow Multi-Faith Declaration?
No, we still have a couple of minutes if you'd like to continue.
Are you sure?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I'll screen share that if that's okay. And you can imagine the wonderful process of working with Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and Buddhists and Jews and Baha'is and just all facets of life and crafting something that everybody felt that they could be very much part of. So it just says our faith communities are united in caring for human life and the natural world. We share a belief in a hopeful future, as well as an obligation to be responsible in caring for our common home, the earth. We recognise the opportunities that COP26 brings in addressing the urgent need for action in limiting the effects of climate change and the critical importance of decisions made in this conference to take forward the agreement made in Paris in 2015. People have exploited the planet, causing climate change, and we recognise that the burden of loss and damage falls most heavily on people living in poverty, especially women and children. We acknowledge the commitments made through the Lambeth Declaration in 2015. And now, because of the gravity of our situation, the impact of climate change around the world, and the inequality of its effects, we seek to strengthen those commitments. We commit to respond to this challenge by reflecting deeply in prayer, meditation, and worship, to discern how to care for the earth and each other, and to encourage our respective communities to do the same. Making transformational change in our own lives and in the lives of our communities through individual and collective action. Being advocates for justice by calling on governments, businesses, and others who exercise power and influence to put into effect the Paris Agreement, to make the transition to a just and green economy a priority, and to commit to science-based targets that are aligned with a healthy, resilient, zero emissions future. We remind governments of their commitments made in Paris, etc. We look to governments to work together with others to create a positive vision. And across our doctrinal political differences, we know that we must change our ways to ensure a quality of life which all can share. And we need to provide hope for people of all ages everywhere, including future generations. To offer hope in the world, we need to have confidence that those in power understand the vital role they have to play at the Glasgow COP26. Our collective energy and prayers will be with those working for a successful outcome. I think it's quite something that you have faith leaders from so many different traditions able to craft something so powerful and so beautiful. And that will be read at our Glasgow, at our interfaith prayer and meditation vigil in George Square. So I just want to end with some thoughts that I've had in terms of the climate crisis. And I'm going to be a little bit radical and say, actually, I don't think there is a climate crisis insofar as the climate is doing what the climate does. The climate is not in crisis. The climate will continue to have various weather patterns, whatever we do. It's actually humanity that is in crisis. It's the human species. And it's a crisis of overconsumption, of greed, of apathy, of indifference. It really is a spiritual and ethical crisis. And the impact of what's happening in the world has to do with the way that we live, the way that we think, the way that we act in the world. So for our health and well-being, we have to change, and then the climate will be quite fine. Thank you very much. And if we don't change, actually the climate will also be quite fine. It will just be us that suffers. It will be the human species that suffers and will continue to suffer. So we have to dig deep to our spiritual and ethical roots, I think, to transform the way we're living on the planet.